Okay, if you have your big book, and you ought to, if you don't, I don't know why we probably shouldn't have let you in the door. Remember, you know, this big book is your manual. It's the thing that we all have to go by. So don't be afraid of people talking about you. They whisper behind your back and call you big book pounder and all that stuff. And what somebody says that to you, say, thank you. That's a compliment. We're going to open the book up to page 68. And we're going to be also looking on page 69 and on page 70. An interesting story that goes along with this. The substantial part of the fourth part of the fourth step, which is our sex inventory, appears on page 69, and there are a lot of people who get a chuckle out of that. There was there's a story. It's apocryphal, I'm certain, and yet it seems to have borne the test of time since it's been passing around ever since I've been around here. Seems this young lady came to her sponsor, and she said to her sponsor, you know, there's this fella John there at the group, and I just think he's absolutely marvelous, and I really want to get to know him, and he won't pay attention to me. He says hello or something, and I'm just fascinated by him. What do I do? And her sponsor said to her, well, all you got to do is find out what the big book says. Look on page 69. So she went home that night and she said, oh, page what? What page was that? Oh, yes, page 96. Let's see what it says on page 96. Do not be discouraged if your prospect does not respond at once. Search out another alcoholic and try again. You are sure to find someone desperate enough to accept with eagerness what you offer. We find it a waste of time to keep chasing a man who cannot or will not work with. If you leave such a person alone, he may soon become convinced that he cannot do this by himself. To spend too much time on any one... What did I say? One situation is to deny some other alcoholic an opportunity to live and be happy. And she said, oh, my sponsor is so smart. For years afterwards, she was telling that story around. I have the smartest sponsor. She solved my whole problem for me. She said, I've been spreading around to every alcoholic who would take it, you know. Okay. All right. Now we're going to be talking about the fourth part of the fourth step. Remember, we have identified the first three parts. They are very clear in the big book. That is, when we work the steps in the big book, we find these four parts are clearly delineated. The first part of the fourth step is our resentment list. And remember that we needed to find out whom we resented and why. And then we needed to be freed from those resentments. And this big book, with the blessing of God, has given us the solution so that when we finish our fourth step, we can go away from it free of resentment. Doesn't mean we won't collect some more along the way, that's for sure. But the ones we walked in the door with, we get to be free of those. And most of that stuff is of long-standing things that have been eating us alive for years and years. Second part of the fourth step deals with us and our problems, especially our difficulties with our minds. Because you see, what we have found is that we came in here screwy as hell. We were nuts. We were insane. Our minds didn't work right. Doesn't mean that we were necessarily candidates for rubber room, not yet anyway. But our minds didn't work right, and we had to find out why and what it was about ourselves that was so twisted and turned and perverted by fear. And also, and more importantly even than that, I suppose, is the fact that these defects of character, this insanity, was blocking us off from God. And I was talking to a friend before the meeting, She was telling me that sometimes it's difficult to know why in the world we're doing this stuff. And sometimes it might seem that way until we go back to the basics. The basic fact is that you and I are powerless over alcohol or drugs or both. And we can't stop drinking or using on our own, and these damn things are going to kill us. And we've admitted this when we took our first step. And we came in here asking and pleading and crying for help, and what we found was 12 steps, which are the program of recovery. And those 12 steps are the 12 steps which lead us inevitably from a place of rebellion and defiance and denial to a place of surrender and acceptance and obedience to a higher power. And it is only through that that we can expect to achieve recovery. And so in order for us to accept God in our lives, to accept this higher power, to be able to receive the gifts which are there for us, to have our heritage, which is to be happy, joyous, and free, it was absolutely necessary that we find out what it is that's blocking us off from God. And so in this second part of the fourth step, we're looking to see, what about dishonesty? Is there dishonesty in us? Is there selfishness in us? Are we loaded with fear? Have we been self-seeking, which is the proof positive of our selfishness? And whom have we harmed? Now that's a very interesting question. Doesn't seem to be in the right place at the right time, but it most certainly is, because that question enables us to begin to identify the people we've hurt by our conduct and toward whom we are going to need to make amends. Because remember that in the fourth step we make our 8-step list. It is in the fourth step that we identify the people we've harmed and become willing to make amends to them. And we carry this forward to our 8th step, only having to add to it if we've missed anybody. The third part of the fourth step was where we identified our fears. We talked about this last week. This horrible thing we call fear, our enemy. Fear, the absence of faith. Fear, that evil and corroding thread, the fabric of our lives being shot through with it. Fear, that powerful alien force which has taken our natural God-given instincts and warped and perverted them so that they no longer even resemble what God gave us. And they've twisted and turned our brains around so that we're just nuts. Our minds don't work right. When we face any kind of a stimuli at all, rather than acting in a natural and normal way as God intended, our reactions are skewed out. And fear has done this to us. And we've had to find out what we're afraid of. And we had a whole list of things, and we wrote down our fears, and we wrote down what caused our fears. And then the big book, as it always does, gave us the solution. It said, okay, now you've got your fears written down, and you've written down what you believe the cause is. Now you take them to God and you ask God to remove your fears, to show you what He would have you be. And then the great promise is that once we will commence to outgrow fear. We learned last week that there's one more step to take. We find it in the 5th step. And when we have admitted these fears to another human being, we have all 3 legs of the triangle. And the big book tells us this: our fears fall from us, they are gone. We get to be free of the fears we walked in the door with. And please, 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 we're not going to indulge ourselves, if I can possibly persuade you, in some of the fantasies that float around here that God isn't going to do these things for us. That somehow or another He has this warped sense of humor and He's going to let us keep on suffering with all this stuff. He's only going to take a little bit here and a little bit there. We don't want to do that. Every time we've placed limits on God's power to help us, we harm ourselves, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Keep in mind that the recovery from this dread disease is all a matter of faith. The growth of faith. It is through our faith that we're healed. And that faith is something which comes to us because we constantly turn to God. We constantly take one leap of faith after another. And each time we do that and it works, and we say, wow, that worked. And we do it again. Wow, that worked again. And we do it again. What's still working? We do it again. Gosh, maybe it will always work. And we do it again. Yes, it will always work. I can trust it. I can trust God. And my faith has grown. And a lot of things begin to happen about that time. Not the least of which is that faith and fear don't live in the same house, and our fears have become less and less and less. Which means that our other defects of character are less and less and less of a burden. But when something comes up which we know is going to harm us, we have no qualms at all about turning to God and say, God, I feel very dishonest today. I feel like lying. I feel like I do not want to face the consequences of my actions here. Please take away this dishonesty. And we know that when we do that, it will be removed. We just know it. And we don't question it anymore. And we don't fall for some of the mythology that floats around here that God doesn't take away our defects, that the 6 and 7 steps are lies. They're not lies, they're the truth. That the big book is a lie when it says that we are to find and to be rid of the things in ourselves which are blocking us. It means exactly what it says. And if we do our job of finding the things that are blocking us, and we admit those things in our 5th step, when we take them to God in the 7th step, He takes them away. That does not mean we don't continue to have the recurrence of problems, because of course we do. We have to live in the world. That's why we have a 10th step. Anybody ever think about that? Why would we have a 10th step at all if it were true that God's going to leave us hanging and out there twisting quietly out in the wind? Why would we even need a 10th step? It says when these crop up. It doesn't say anything about when these things that are still hanging around in us give us trouble. It means exactly what it says. The world and all of its people have continued to threaten us, and threat translates to fear, and fear translates to the recurrence, the cropping up of defects, which we now have all the tools we need to be free of if we wish to use them. Never again do we have to live in fear. Never again do we have to go to bed with a resentment killing us. Never again do we have to indulge ourselves in that damnable dishonesty. Never again do we have to live in fear, because we have the tools that we need. And all those tools point right back to God, and they point right back to spiritual solutions which we have been taught to use. Not the least of which we're going to find now in our sex inventory. I suppose that if you were to catalog or said some way of accurately measuring it, you would find, and I believe this to be true, that nothing causes more problems with people in recovery than these so-called relationships. Now remember that in AA, relationship is a buzzword for sex relations. You'll never hear anybody talking around the rooms, oh, I had a relationship, and not mean I went to bed with, or whatever your poison is. We always refer to our sex relations as relationships, and I don't think I've ever heard anybody talk about a friendship as a relationship. So let's just use that word because everybody pretty much understands what it means. Relationships cause more trouble in here than anything else. And why? Well, there are a lot of reasons, I suppose, not the least of which is that sex relations are intimately tied to self. They're intimately tied to all sorts of taboos and moral problems and religious stuff, and we're bombarded with it from all sides, and we have never been properly taught how to deal with it. Many people have said, oh, just don't do it. Well, so what? I mean, nobody's going to pay much attention to that. Or you can do it all you want, just don't get caught. Or if you, it's okay to do this, but not okay to do that. We've gotten away from the good old-fashioned stuff where the guy only had to walk around the tent 4 times to divorce his wife. You know, that would have been nice. I'm just kidding, girls. Not. Anyway, they had some really screwy ideas in those days. And so do we. We have probably 10 times as screwy ideas as they ever did. They had it pretty simple. We got this sex stuff so mixed up with everything else in life, we can't even tell which is sex and which is buying a new car. Or toothpaste. Or for goodness sakes, use Listerine or you'll never get kissed again. I mean, we've gotten this stuff down to a point now where it is all pervasive. And therefore, it has become an overwhelming and overriding influence in our lives. There isn't any doubt about that. And it is ultimately, for almost all of us, completely and utterly self-centered and selfish. And in order to cater to self, it has been the ultimate in dishonesty for so many of us. Almost everybody walked in that door will point over and over again to their failed relationships. And of course, this is not limited in any way to our relationships with sex partners. Our relationships across the board have failed. And Bill often said that the biggest problem that people have coming in terms of their lives is that their relationships have gone to pot. They were never able to properly deal on an even field with other people. And so we're looking at something here which needs a lot of help, and where we need a lot of help. But it goes beyond that too, because the big book is not limited to finding out what our problems with sex have been, by no means. As a matter of fact, the most important function that this sex inventory is going to do for us is it's going to point out in absolute bas relief, widescreen, Technicolor, Stereophonic, and Dolby, our selfishness and our dishonesty, so that we can no longer deny the existence of these two extremely damaging defects of character. Let's go back just for a second to remember what the big book tells us about selfishness. It tells us that our problems are of our own making, that they arise out of ourselves, that we are extreme examples of self-will run riot. But more than that, it tells us that we have to be rid of self, or it'll kill us. I think the sanest people in the whole world are sitting right in this room. The crazy ones are all out there. We may be a little bit nuts, but they are really crazy. We get a chance to recover in here. But here's the problem, you see. Because we walk in the door, we're really screwy, our minds don't function right. The problem we have exists in our heads. We're dealing with obsession and compulsion over which we have absolutely no control. We're dealing with a physical reaction to alcohol over which we have no control. We are, by definition, alcoholics and powerless over alcohol. And then when we came in here, we found out, yes, there is a solution. Absolutely there's a solution. The solution is to have a spiritual experience. Read that Spiritual Awakening. But how are we going to get that unless we can in some way accept God, a higher power, as the force in our lives, the Father of us all as His children, the leader, the principal, we His agents? How can we achieve this without the third step prayer being realized somewhere down the line? God, I offer myself to Thee to do with me and to build with me as Thou wilt. No reservations. None. Take me. I'm here. Take me. That's what that means. But how are we going to realize that if we are living encased in self? How are we going to realize that if our spirit is tied up with ropes and chains and cables of self? How are we going to realize that so long as our spirit is in a psychic fetal position and has no chance to soar with the angels? The answer, of course, is that we can't. We have no chance. So self and selfishness becomes an absolutely vital aspect of our fourth step. We must identify our selfishness and our self-centeredness. And this fourth part of the fourth step, this sex inventory, is the prime mover in our search for self, because it is in our relationships, our sex relations, that self has raised its ugly head in the most obscene and obvious ways. And we get a chance to really see it. This fourth step is designed so that when we finish it, we can no longer deny that these things are going on in our spirit, in our soul. That this is part of us, that our heads contain this warpage. If you think I'm overstating it, I'm sorry if you feel that way. I don't think I am. And I'll tell you why. We're not dealing here with something which is like a common cold. This is not something for which we can take a shot. We're dealing with life and death. We're dealing with a disease which is invariably fatal, which is incurable and terribly progressive. And therefore we cannot fool with it. We've got to recognize everything about ourselves which needs to be changed in order for us to recover and stay recovered. And this is hard work. It means that we have to be very thorough and very honest about it. Now then, if we're going to do a proper sex inventory, we're going to need to take a look at all of our sexual encounters. Now, some people have difficulty with that, mainly because their memories will not accommodate the full panoply of their activities, which is okay too, because nothing says that we have to identify everybody by their Christian name or their Jewish name or whatever kind of name they have. How about Chicago 1, 2, and 3? How about Miami A, B, and C? Doesn't matter as long as we know who we're talking about, does it? And then some of us, of course, have been specialists in the one-night stand department. That's okay too, because we're going to find that, for example, one-night stands almost all have precisely the same characteristics, so it becomes pretty much irrelevant who the person was. You all know the story of Coyote Ugly, don't you? Everybody know about Coyote Ugly? Everybody does? Oh yeah, you wake up in the morning and it's so horrible you chew your arm off to get out of there. Okay. All right. And so we get to take these one-night stands and we can lump them all together. They're going to all have the same characteristics. Keep in mind now, the purpose here is for us to find out about us. That's the whole thing about this fourth step. We're trying to find out what's wrong with us, because in order for us to take this into our fifth step and admit it, we have to know what it is, don't we? Back during the third step, we said, take away my difficulties, God. We didn't know what they were. We hadn't done anything about inventorying them. We knew we were in bad shape, but we didn't know what that bad shape looked like. So, all right, so we're going to be taking a sex inventory. So let's first make a list of all the people we had sex with. That is all that we can remember. And there's another purpose for doing this, and it's a very important one. Many, 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 many of our relationships had the potential, at least, for severe damage to the other person due to our dishonesty and our selfishness and other things that we may have done. And so in doing this sex inventory, part of our purpose here is to find out if we have caused harm to any of these folks, because they're going to go on our 8-step list. And so we're looking closely here to see what we may have done which harmed someone else. Now, this is a kind of an interesting thing too, because I've heard this over and over again. Well, it's, you know, we were both consenting, and well, she couldn't have been hurt by that. I mean, after all, she was sleeping around and all this. And I always say, whoa, wait a minute. What did you say you did to her? Okay, that sounds a little bit raw. Let me ask you something. Suppose someone did that to you. Would that hurt you? Well, yeah, I wouldn't like that a bit. What more test do you need? We don't have to guess, speculate whether it might have hurt her. All we have to know is it would have hurt me if it had been done to me. And we're going to assume the damage to her, aren't we? What other test do we have? And we can rationalize the other stuff all we want. And that's what we've been doing. We got to get away from that kind of thinking. Oh, of course she could have been hurt. How the hell do you know? Were you in her, walking in her moccasins? Were you inside of her skin? Do you have any idea what her real background was? Do you have any idea how sensitive she may have been to that kind of treatment, in spite of all her efforts to seem sophisticated? No, you weren't. You never could be. If it hurt you, you'd better assume it hurt her. And we can carry that forward into all of our amends, can't we? In deciding whom have we harmed, we look to see if it would be harmful to us. Now then, once we have listed all of these people, we're going to answer a series of questions about each of our relationships. And these questions appear on page 69, and each of them must be answered fully and completely. We reviewed our conduct over the years past. Now these first 3 questions are to be answered in a long form. This is a prose answer. It's not yes or no. Let's just take a for instance. Suppose that on my list I had someone named Hortense. Why in the world I'd ever have sex relations with Hortense, I don't know, but she was beautiful, except she was cross-eyed. Now, with respect to Hortense, then, I'm going to answer these questions. In my relationship with Hortense, where had I been selfish? You notice the use of the word where. It does not ask me, was I selfish? It asks me, where was I selfish? Which means that I must write a narrative answer describing my selfishness and my self-centeredness. The next question, in my relationship with Hortense, where was I dishonest? Again, requires a narrative answer. And then finally, where was I inconsiderate? Now, after I have written out these descriptions of my selfishness, my dishonesty, and my inconsideration, the next question is, whom had I hurt? And that question really goes to this: did I hurt Hortense? And so this is where we apply the rule, the test that we were talking about the last hour. If what I did to Hortense, if that were done to me and it would hurt me, then I must assume that I hurt her. Now, in my relationship with Hortense, did I unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Those questions can be answered yes or no. I think it's very good form, however, let's say that I answer, yes, I unjustifiably aroused jealousy in Hortense, it would be very good form for me to write down what I did and what my motives were. And because you see, this, when I unjustifiably arouse jealousy in somebody, I'm doing them great harm. The Big Book says that jealousy is the most terrible human emotion. And jealousy is the direct product of overwhelming fear of loss, fear of the loss of something or someone upon whom we depend. It's a very, very powerful negative emotion. Next question. Did I, let's see. Yeah. Where was I at fault? Now, this question seems like it ought to be already have been answered, but not so. Because when I look at my faults, one of the things I'm going to be looking at very closely is see what in the world did I get into this relationship for in the first place? What was I looking for? What did I want? What were the needs that were being fulfilled for me? Also, if I have been harmful to Hortense in some way, let's say I have been abusive mentally, psychologically, or physically, I must also admit that and write that down. So where was I at fault? And then what should I have done instead? Now this last question is very, very important, guys, because you see what it's going to do is lead inevitably to what we must next do, which is to craft an ideal for how we wish to conduct ourselves in the future, an ideal for our future relationship life. We'll talk about that in just a second. We got this all down on paper and looked at it. Remember, this is an inventory, and an inventory is a written list. No matter where you find it in the Big Book, 4th step, obviously, 10th step, and the 11th step, each of these inventories is to be in writing. It is silly to try to take inventory in our heads. We're not. Some of us may have those kind of steel trap minds that we can do it, but most of us do not. There's another thing which is missing. If we don't write it down, we don't get it out of our head and down on paper where it needs to be. You want to be free of something, get it out of your head and down on paper. There's a little ditty that goes along with this. The more you write, the better you feel. Maybe we can all remember that. The more you write, the better you feel. Get it down on paper where you don't just slip right by it and rationalize it and put it aside like we've always done. When a bad thought came, we had a pigeonhole for that sucker. We could lock that away behind 7 locked doors. It was never going to see the light of day. And when we write it down, we can't avoid it anymore. It's right there staring us in the face. We say, oh, Lordy, Lordy, what do I do about this? Well, we've got the tools to use. Thank you, God, we do. Now then, this next paragraph is of extreme importance, and it so often is just glided over as if it was basically meaningless, and yet it is fraught with all kinds of powerful meaning. And next week, when we come back together, we'll be talking about how to work a 5th step. And thank you all very much. Okay, guys, let's close the meeting. Pretty sure there isn't any other way. In this way, we tried to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life. Well, now this does not mean the ideal partner. So many people look at this and when they start writing, they say, well, he's got to be handsome and strong and sensitive and kind and caring and rich in capital letters, you know. And vulnerable. But this has nothing to do with him or with her. It has to do with you and me. This is an ideal which we are to, with God's help, write down and say, this is how I wish to conduct myself in the future in my relationships, especially my sex relationships, but by no means limited to them, because this ideal is going to be our ideal for how we will treat all people. Now, what's happened here, you see, is that by doing our inventory, we found out what didn't work. We found out what was wrong with us. We found out in our selfishness and our dishonesty. We found out what rotten, stinking motives we had, how bad our attitudes were. We found out about our prejudices. We found out about our uncontrollable sex urges. We found out what it means when people talk about the imperious urge. We found out, in short, what has happened to our sex instinct as it has been warped and perverted by fear, so that it no longer works for us and for the good of the human race, but works against us and against everybody who comes in contact with us, because it is no longer what God gave us. It no longer resembles what God gave us. It is craziness. It is insanity. And it is based on selfishness and dishonesty. And this is the way we have rationalized our lives, and we have rationalized that we're entitled to do this, that this is that somehow or another this is all okay. Look at modern literature, look at modern movies, look at modern television. Just listen around the locker room, and it all comes together. Whatever works, whatever you can get away with goes. We are so unkind to each other. We are so unthinking. We are so selfish and so dishonest. And you see, the people out there who are not dealing with a disease which wants to kill them can probably get away with this stuff, at least in part, but we can't. We cannot abide these terrible defects of character, and we cannot abide the guilt which has been occasioned by our actions, because these things block us from God. Go back to the basics. You want to recover, you're going to have God's help. You want God's help, get rid of the stuff that blocks you from Him. Simple. Simple. There's nothing complicated about any of this stuff. It's a mechanical process. What the big book says, when we get up to 10th step, it's automatic. It's automatic. If you do the things which the big book directs you to do, if you work these steps in accordance with the directions here, forget about anything else in the literature or anything else that's been produced by people out there for money or to get their degree certified. Come back to Big Book, follow the directions here, and automatically you will be restored to sanity. Even if you don't want to be, you will be. Even if it's uncomfortable to be sane, too bad. You're going to be restored to sanity, because you have done those things necessary to invoke God's power working in your life. It's that simple. And you've made room for Him. It's that simple. So now let's see what else this says. We subjected each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? Aha! We're right back with our old friend selfishness again, aren't we? What is the root of our troubles? Selfishness, self-centeredness. What must we be free of? Selfishness, self-centeredness. How do we get free of self? Only through God's help. We cannot do it ourselves, because we are as powerless over self as we are over alcohol or drugs. Period. Simple. So we must invoke God's help to be free of self. Was it selfish or not? We ask God to mold our ideals and to help us live up to them. In other words, we're going to go to God and say, look, God, I need your help to write down here what my ideals should be for my future sex life. Please come into my heart and show me what that ought to be. I already have a pretty good idea, God, because I know that I'm going to have to stay free of this selfishness and dishonesty. And I got to quit hurting people and taking them for granted. And I'm going to have to start using the moral fiber that I was born with and living up to the ethics which I know are right. I'm going to have to quit doing the things to people that I know are wrong in spite of the fact that I know they're wrong. I've done them anyway. I know I'm going to have to do that, but God help me put this all together so that it comes out and it shows me how I am to live my life in the future. And He will do that. You see, God always answers your prayers, especially if your prayer is something which is going to help you grow spiritually. He does it for all of us. New cars may be a little difficult to come by, but spiritual help, anything that will help us grow spiritually and grow toward Him and grow toward His ideal for us and help us to become willing to live our lives by spiritual principles. Any of that, we'll get that answered right away. Boom, 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 boom. It doesn't mean God's hand's going to come down and slap us around the face. It means that we're going to find circumstances, we're going to find events, and we're going to find people appearing in our life who will be there to help us and show us, either by teaching us or by their example, that this is the way we are to solve the problem. And He always does that for us. Now listen to this. We remembered always that our sex powers were God-given and therefore good. Well, wait a minute. Gosh, we've been hearing, well, you know, what's the fun of doing this stuff if it's good? I was doing it because it was bad. I was doing it because I thought I was getting away with something. But wait a minute, it says our sex powers are God-given and therefore good. It does not say that our sexual activities in any direction we wish to go are good. It says our sex powers are given and therefore good. God-given. This means that we're dealing here with a natural God-given instinct. Now remember always that an instinct is something which operates below the level of conscious thought. This is not something over which we have conscious control. You do not have to think, I am attracted to her. And by the way, I would like to go to bed with her. Because this is not something that we whomp up in our heads. We don't engender these things. They're there. The sex instinct, it's an instinct. It directs us from the back here in the medulla oblongata. This is the automatic stuff that we have no power over. That's why we can't get rid of these defects ourselves, because they operate below the level of conscious thought. These are all the warping of natural instincts. That's what a defect is. That's why we have to have God's help. He got to straighten out the stuff that He gave us that was perfect when we got it, and because of the life we've lived, it's become warped and perverted by fear, and He got to come back into our lives and help us straighten it out, and He will, and He does. And He restores us to sanity. So all this stuff's pretty simple. God-given and therefore good, neither to be used lightly or selfishly, nor to be despised and loathed. And how many times does that latter admonition come into play? So many people have been so beaten up around the head and shoulders that they believe that their sex powers are nasty, rotten, immoral, terrible. That these are the kinds of things which even to think about it is going to throw us into the depths of hell. Well, if God intended us to have sexual thoughts and aspirations and desires, I doubt very much if He would make that as a one-way ticket to hell. Now, perhaps that's true, but I seriously doubt it. And so, but many people are scared to death of sex. How many times do you talk to some, especially you gals who do a lot of sponsoring of women? I'm going to be celibate the rest of my life. And you say to yourself, you're a wise sponge, and say, sure, okay. Oh, yeah, sure, okay. But tell me, Tell me, Mary Jane Lou, why? Well, look what happened. You can't trust man, and they do this to you, do that to you. And you just say to yourself, just stick around, honey. You're going to be all right. Let God have it. But for God's sakes, don't say to her, you can't have a relationship for a year. Why? Where did that ever come from? Now suppose you were to go to a married lady and say to her, you can't have a sex relation for a year. Tell your husband that he's out of luck. You think that's funny. That's not the least bit funny. I remember as clearly as if it were yesterday. I was at a birthday meeting at the Coral Room in South Miami, and there was a beautiful young woman there sitting with two beautiful children and a very handsome husband, and they were sitting against the back wall at the old Coral Room. And this lady, she was taking her one-year medallion, and this lady's sponsor got up and she said, oh, I'm so proud of Susie. I told her when she first came to me that she would have to be away from her husband and have no relationship for a year. And she did it, and I'm so proud of her. And I looked back there and I said to myself first, those two children were deprived of their mother for a year. That husband was deprived of his wife for a year. Because of you? Because of this idiocy, this stupidity? And finally I stood up and I said exactly the same thing in public. And the lady was very huffy about it, as you can imagine. And she reminded me that in that wonderful book called Living Sober, that's what it says. I said, that's fine, but Living Sober says on the first page, it doesn't even purport to say anything about the steps of the big book. Why do you suppose we have a chapter called The Family Afterwards? Why do you suppose we have a chapter to wives? Why do you suppose that the big book is always in every way consistent about this one thing? It is up to God. It is not up to my sponsor or my friends. It is up to God. I am turning in all things to the Father of light. I am going to trust Him in all things. And if God decides that there is a lady who belongs in my life, and I have been sober 4 months, and she has been sober 3 months, and He puts us together, and I have prayed about it, and she's prayed about it, and we meditated about it, and it finally becomes absolutely clear that this is meant to be. Who are we to say, God, you have just made a terrible mistake, son? You see, we have to be consistent. On the one hand, we can't say to people, trust God in all things, turn in all things to the Father of light who presides over us all, except this one thing. You can't have a relationship for a year. And not only that, but you can't make a major decision in a year. Even if your company wants to send you to Timbuktu and give you a 75% raise and pay all your moving expenses and tells you if you don't go, you're going to get fired, you still can't do it because that's a major decision. You see, when you take these things and you begin to push them out to their little bit to their extremes, and they just all fall apart. It's like any other thing that human beings come up with. That's why we don't have human solutions here. These are spiritual solutions. You take any human idea and you carry it out to its extreme, and it always falls apart. Always. It is the spiritual solutions which are eternal and immutable and never fail. That's why we have them in this book, and that's why they work. Going to the next paragraph. Whatever our ideal turns out to be, we must be willing to grow toward it. We must be willing to make amends where we've done harm, provided we do not bring about still more harm in so doing. Notice that the willingness to make amends, the willingness of the 8th step, is accomplished right here in the 4th step. In other words, listen to this now, here's the key. In other words, we treat sex as we would any other problem. This is not standing alone. This is not something which we're going to apply treatment center psychobabble to. This is not something we're going to apply the predilections and prejudices of our sponsor to. This is not something we're going to seek the answers to in a little book called Living Sober. This is something which we are going to turn to God with. What's it say in the next sentence? In meditation, we ask God what we should do about each specific matter. Period. And the next sentence is so powerful and so important because it runs all the way through our entire prayer and meditation life. The right answer will come if we want it. Which means, quite simply, if I have decided that Mary Sue Luann, whatever her name is that she's God-given, that God wants this absolutely, and I'm going to have it come hell or high water, which hell is probably right around the corner when I do this. I'm going to convince myself that this is God's will for me, and I'm going to go to my sponsor and I'm going to say, I know this is God's will for me. And my sponsor said, well, you better meditate about it, hadn't you? So now I'm meditating. You can see me meditating. But I'm not going to accept any answer except the one I want. God better say, oh yeah, my boy. That's my will for you. Go get it, man. This is really... I don't get that answer, I reject it. I might even try several times to see if the answer comes up different next. Oh, man. Did I say something about us really being saner than anybody else out there? Maybe I better take that back. No, I still believe that. And it's because we have this, guys. It's because we get to do this, because we are taught and instructed to do it, and because when we do it, it works, and because when it works, we get faith. And then we say, God, I trust you. I'm going to turn to you and ask you what you want me to do. And when we're meditating, the key to meditation is to be willing to accept the answer no matter what it may be. Down at the bottom of the page, God alone can judge our sex situation. Wow, how important is that? You know, around here, there are always a certain number of vultures who are making decisions and making judgments about everybody else. And they especially circle and peck at the weak members of the herd, you know. The ones that make themselves vulnerable or falter. You find them circling. It's too bad. If you're a sponsor, you try your best to protect your little pigeons from this. But there are some people who are able to stick around here for a while doing unspeakable things. But keep in mind that alcoholism is a self-cleaning oven. Sooner or later, they're gone. But making judgments about other people, where in the hell did we get the idea that we have a right to do that? We don't judge anyone else's sex situation. Counsel with others, it says, is often desirable, but we let God be the final judge, period. Now, there are all kinds of shapes and forms of sexuality floating around, some of which we may not agree with. Maybe we've got religious convictions. Tough. That's just tough. That has every place in the church and no place in here. Remember what they said back in the American Revolution, when those guys were signing the Declaration of Independence? So we must all hang together, or assuredly we will all hang separately. The unity of our fellowship is the foundation stone of our own personal recovery, and without it, we perish. We do not make judgments. Whatever your private judgment may be, that's fine, and anything which is private with you and is not expressed or bandied about is fine. We all get to have that. That is never taken away from us. But we do not express nor act upon these judgments because we have no right to do so. We realize that some people are as fanatical about sex as others are loose. We avoid hysterical thinking or advice. This paragraph is really, really, really interesting and very important, and I want to tell you that it's going to carry forward to our 11th step. What we learn here is what we will carry forward into our 11th step. Let's see what it is. We have our ideal for how we wish to live our future sex life. Suppose we fall short of the chosen ideal and stumble. Does this mean we're going to get drunk? Some people tell us so, but this is only a half-truth. It depends on us and on our motives. Aha! Motives is raising its ugly head right here, isn't it? And we're going to hear more and more and more about motive as we go. When you start taking a PhD in recovery up around the 11th step, motive is going to be very important. Because we're going to find out that we can do the right thing for the wrong motive and be just as wrong as if we did the wrong thing. And so we're going to be watching our motives all the way through. Now here's the rule. If we are sorry for what we have done and have the honest desire to let God take us to better things, we believe we will be forgiven and will have learned our lesson. Notice the two parts of that. That we're sincerely sorry for what we've done, but even more important, that we're willing to let God take us on to better things, to correct the problem. In other words, our surrender is complete enough now that we're saying, God, I know I did wrong here. Please show me how to do better. If we are not sorry and our conduct continues to harm others, we are quite sure to drink. And this goes for the people around these rooms who deliberately and consistently are harming other people with their words, with their gossip, with the things they do that are mean, rotten, and nasty. They're quite sure to drink. You may think, they may think they're impervious. They are not. And we don't buy into that stuff. You want to stop anybody? You want to stop gossip? Stop listening to it. We are not theorizing. These are facts out of our experience. Now let's take a look quickly on page 86. Turn your books to page 86. I want to show you how this comes in. The first full paragraph on page 86 is the 11-step inventory, which is one of the better kept secrets in the big book. This is a 10-question inventory which we do every night. As we do this inventory, we find if we have gotten off the path, if we have strayed from the chosen ideal. Let's find out what it tells us down at the bottom of that first paragraph. After making our review, we ask God's forgiveness and inquire what corrective measures should be taken. This is the only place in the big book where we are instructed, directed to seek forgiveness. Now you can see how that dovetails in directly with what we learned all the way back here in the fourth step. And then finally, on page 70, to sum up about sex, we earnestly pray for the right ideal, for guidance in each questionable situation. Guidance, the prayer is for guidance. We are not praying to the group. We're praying to God. We're asking God for guidance in each questionable situation. By the way, it always amuses me when people talk about the group being their higher power. I've never yet seen anybody get down on their knees and pray to their group. Never once. I would be shocked if I ever saw it. So would the whole group. They'd say, what the heck's going on here? For strength to do the right thing. For sanity and for strength to do the right thing. This is the direction. This is what we are directed to do. What makes us think that somehow or another sex and our sex relationships are exempt from God's power and from the general principles that we're going to be living our lives by? They're not. We get to fit that stuff right into everything else that we're doing in our lives, where we're letting God be the guide, where we're living our lives by spiritual principles, where we're paying attention to the moral sense that we all have. We know right from wrong. We just haven't been willing to do it in the past. We've been breaking our own moral sense and moral fiber, and we have done so. And now we're going to stop doing that. And even if you don't want to stop doing it simply on the basis that it's right and wrong, maybe you don't have that much of a belief in right and wrong, and that's fine. Nobody in here is going to tell you you have to. But let's look at it from another standpoint. As we've done this inventory, we have found out what did not work. What didn't work. We want to recover, it's simple. We start doing what will work. And when we start doing what will work, our whole life changes. And we say, wow, why didn't I think about this before? This was so simple. Just start doing what will work. Do the next right thing. Take care of what's in front of you to be done. Leave the results up to God. Don't hurt another person. That's all we got to do. That's all. Do the next right thing. Do what's in front of us to be done. Don't hurt anybody. Most importantly, leave the results up to God. If sex is very troublesome, we throw ourselves the harder into helping others. Why? How could that work? It's simple. Didn't we just find out that the basis of our sex problems is self and selfishness and self-centeredness? And what happens when we start working with others? We get out of self, don't we? And when we get out of self, there's room for God to come in. The perfect definition of insanity is being buried in our own heads. We think of their needs and work for them. This takes us out of ourselves. It quiets the imperious urge. When to yield would mean heartache. Remember in the 7th chapter it tells us nothing will so much insure against the next drink as intensive work with other alcoholics. Because it is in doing that we get out of self. Remember what Bill said. He said if he failed to enlarge and perfect his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain low spots ahead, and he would drink again. So it all comes back to this. Take what you've been given and give it away. Take what you've been given and give it away, and give it away, and give it away, and never ask for anything in return. And what you will receive is something far greater and more valuable than you have ever had before and could ever get any other way. You want that wonderful life that was always dangling out there like a carrot in front of you. Take what you've been given, take God's grace and give it to others, and you will find that, and it will be yours. Now, I don't know of any other way to get it. I'm pretty sure there isn't any other way. 4 lines up. We have listed the people who have hurt by our conduct and are willing to straighten out the past if we can. That's our 8-step list. Go to the top of page 71. We hope you are convinced now that God can remove whatever self-will has blocked you off from Him. If you have already made a decision and an inventory of your grosser handicaps, you've made a good beginning. So when we come out of the 4th step, we have our 8-step list, and we have a list of our defects of character. And these we carry forward into our 5th step,